Well, hello again, brothers and sisters. It's good to see you and good to be with you. All right, well, we are going through a consideration of the opening portion of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, and those opening verses are referred to commonly as the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes. 8 declarations, each of one which begins with the word blessed, and then there's a character description or a characteristic uh, that is given by Jesus, and then there is a promised blessing and grace that is given to those who possess these particular attitudes. So we are considering those Beatitudes, and we're beginning with the first of the 8 Beatitudes, which is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God." So we did introduce ourselves to the notion of being poor in spirit, and we talked about what it means to be blessed, which means to have a unique form of delight and joy and happiness within our souls because we are aware that we have been a benefactor. We have received God's goodness and graciousness towards us. We have a clear, vivid understanding or recognition that God has been good to me. And that's what it is to be blessed. And when you have that, you have a profound sense of joy and delight and satisfaction that comes from that. So these are 8 characteristics that produce blessedness. And they really are hallmarks of the characteristics of those who may be in and are in the kingdom of God. All right, so we did look at the overview of the term poor in spirit. All I want to do is do a real quick review of it and just expand upon it and ask 2 basic questions. So let's just begin with the review of the 2 distinct meanings of the word poor. The word poor is an entirely appropriate and good translation, but if you'll notice, I use the word here, a destitute, and I would suggest to you that from now on, when you consider this beatitude, it would be much more helpful for you to just use the word destitute. Blessed are the destitute in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Because this is really the more specific meaning of the word poor, and it really much more captures the profound significance of what Jesus is conveying to us. So again, the Greeks had 2 different words for poor. The first word was a poverty where you just have the basic you have only the basic necessities of life. You have food, you have clothing, you have some place to live, but there's very little above and beyond the fundamental needs of life that you possess. This is the general sense of poverty. So the vast majority of people throughout all of human history have been poor in this category. They have been poor in that they have had very little to call their own, and their lives have been basically a day-to-day existence of survival. So that's the general sense of poverty. The way that we think of poverty in America wouldn't even fit this first definition of poverty, because even people in America that are described as being at a poverty level of existence, most of these people have a car, they have central heating and air conditioning, they have internet access, they have a cell phone, they have many amenities that go far above and beyond just food, clothing, and shelter. But the second word that the Greeks used to describe poor meant to be wholly destitute. Okay? It means to be wholly destitute. So when you are destitute, you are compelled to beg for your daily food. and you are wholly dependent upon others' kindness for your survival. This is utter destitution. This means you can't even provide for food for yourself, that you are in a position of utter dependence upon others for your daily food in order that you might live. It's the grossest, deepest sense of poverty, where you are hanging by a thread of survival from day to day, wholly dependent upon others to give you at least a measure of food that will get you through that day. And above and beyond that, you have nothing else. This is utter destitution. So this is not just you don't have anything, but you do not have the ability, the power within your own self to provide for your own self. And it's important to see that. You might be thinking, well, some people are destitute because they just brought that poverty on themselves. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a destitution where someone is utterly incapable and unable. Sorry, my collar is itching me back here for some crazy reason. Forgive me for my fidgeting there. But anyway, we need to see that destitution in order to understand what's happening here. So Jesus is speaking of being destitute in spirit. So I just want to ask two questions. Who are those who are destitute in spirit? Who are these people? And why are they blessed and promised the kingdom of heaven? Who are the destitute in spirit? And why are the destitute in spirit blessed and promised the kingdom of heaven? So let's think about destitution, first of all, in the material, biological, physical realm of one's being. There are three dimensions to being in a destitute situation. So let's take these three conditions and let's take them first in the physical dimension of one's life, providing for one's material, financial, biological necessities for existence, and then let's apply it, take those same principles and apply it to spirit. So, when you are destitute, the first quality is that you are lacking the basic things you need to live. You are lacking the basic things you need to live and survive. Number two, when you're destitute, you are utterly unable to provide those things for yourself. So it's one thing to not have the things you need to live and then say, well, but I do have some money and I can go to the store and get some things to eat. So you have no food at home, but you say, wait a minute, I do have some money, I can go to the store and get something to eat. Destitution is deeper than this. Destitution is when you lack the things, you don't have the food you need to live, and you're not able to provide it for yourself. You are incapable of providing it for yourself. Think, if you will, in the ancient world, a person who is horribly physically infirmed through major injury or through deformity at birth, and all they can do is be laid at the outside of a city gate and hope that somebody will help them, because they are unable to labor for themselves and provide a means to take care of themselves. And then the third dimension, when you're destitute, is you're in a place where you're wholly dependent upon the grace and the goodness of other people to give you what you cannot provide for yourself. So think about those three things. You lack the most basic necessities for life. You are unable of yourself to make those necessities and provide them. And number three, you are dependent on others to do for you what you can't do for yourself, for others to give you the fundamental food that you need to survive from day to day. Now, here is something that I don't think anyone could disagree with. This is a condition that we just described. This is a condition that we all find utterly horrifying. This description of destitution is utterly horrifying to us. No human being would want and legitimately seek to be in that level of existence. There are people that are in that level of existence, but except for some exceptions, which may very well be the case, very few human beings are ever going to say, yes, this is the way I want to be and the way that I want to live. So this is a horrifying state. And we are driven, almost in a natural sense, to avoid at all costs this destitute situation. And yet, Jesus uses this horrific word, destitution, and he uses it to describe the state of our spirit that leads to blessedness. So that's, again, the way that Jesus challenges and overturns our expectations and our status quo assumptions about what we think is needed to find the kingdom of heaven. And here Jesus uses a concept and a reality that no human being could find anything good about, and yet uses it in a way to say that this actually is the foundation to entering into the kingdom of heaven itself. So, what is Jesus up to in using this most unpleasant and horrific description of human existence, of utter destitution, and now transforming it into a word that describes a person who is blessed, who is blessed by God, and who will find the kingdom of heaven? Well, let me offer you an analogy. Okay? Here's the analogy, and that is that just as a person who is destitute of food recognizes how desperately he needs food to live and needs the help of others in order to obtain it. So, there's the second part, the part of the analog, if you will. So also does a person who is destitute of spirit recognize how desperately he or she needs God. That's the key thought. To be poor in spirit is to have a firm, clear, deep down in your soul realization, a waking up to how desperately I need God. And that's a person who is destitute in spirit. They know how destitute they are apart from God. So a destitute person knows how destitute they are apart from food and clothing and shelter, don't they? Apart from those things, his life is unthinkable. And so also a person who is destitute in their spirit knows how destitute they are apart from God. And now they've come to the realization how deeply desperately that they need God in order to find life, and how desperately they need God's grace and love and mercy and all that comes with the reality of God and his saving presence in our life. So that's the point. Just as the body needs food to live, so does the spirit need God to live. And the body, without access to food, is in a destitute situation. And the human spirit, without access to God, is in a destitute situation. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, being apart from God, that's not a good thing to be in. No, that's not a good thing to be in. The good thing is when you are aware of your destitute situation. Most human beings don't live with the full realization of how much they desperately need God. In fact, most human beings' life is entire life is a project of avoiding God and convincing ourselves that we don't, quote, need God anymore. So that's the place where the blessing comes in, okay? So when we're not poor in spirit, what we're doing is we're seeking to fill our souls, and we're trying to find life in things which can give us a false sense of satisfaction for a while, but in the end will leave us empty. Okay? So we all have a hungering inside and an emptiness inside and a recognition that there is something beyond my own self that I need to find fulfillment in my life. It's just that we are not convinced that that thing beyond me that I need would be God Himself. Okay? So people recognize how desperate their situation can be, but they're not recognizing how desperate their situation is apart from God. And so when a person has plenty of food and plenty of clothing and a nice place to live and enough wealth to possess and purchase much more above and beyond. I have often used this word with us in the church as abundance. To live out of abundance is to have much more than fundamental necessities of life. And all of us live with great abundance. That is, we have much that is way beyond the fundamental rudimentary things that we need in life. Even our food is an abundance. I mean, ice cream sundaes and all the delicious foods that we are able to eat. We don't need to have fancy dinners to survive. We could survive off rice and beans and water and bread if that's what it came down to. But we can live even above that and enjoy delicious food. Even that is a sense of an abundance, a far above and beyond what we need. Same thing with clothing. We can buy the most fundamental, just to have something over your cover your body clothing, or we can buy nice clothes that we like to wear, and we don't need to. We can shelter ourselves in a home far above and beyond having our home just be a place that we live to exist. So I got a little off track there. My apologies, but this is the opposite of being poor in spirit. So why then are the destitute in spirit blessed? Why are they blessed? Well, to try to illustrate why they're blessed, let's again consider how foolish this sentence sounds. A human being says to you, I don't need food to live. That's the first thing. Now, how foolish could that sound to you? Would any human being make that statement? I don't need food to live. I can't envision any person ever saying that. I don't need food to live. I can survive without food. That is utter absurdity. But what if they were to say that they don't need food to live and then add this? I can eat pablum and I can be just fine. Now, this is being silly, I know, but pablum is something you can eat, but it has no nutritional value whatsoever. So you can eat it, your body can I guess the word isn't even digest it, because there's no nutrients, there's nothing that is in a pablum that is going to be beneficial to your health and give you sustenance. But you could eat pablum, or you could eat, let's call it empty calories that provide nothing for your body to help it, and you can feel full and satisfied. And that's what my point is. Here's a person who says, I don't need food to survive. I can use something else in its place. And I do use this thing in the place of food, and I feel perfectly satisfied. I feel full and I feel fine. Well, you're going to feel fine for a while, but if all you're doing is filling your belly with pablum, you may be giving yourself a false sense of satisfaction. But as time ticks by, your body is going to experience the lack of its nutrition and the lack of the things that it needs, and then your health will begin to deteriorate. So you may be able to get away with that for a period of time, but eventually it's going to come back to bite you. So that sounds utterly foolish. Everybody would say that person's insane. All right, so consider that the following statement is just as foolish as the first one. And that statement is, I don't need God. And you could just put it right there. I don't need God. Period. End of story. I do not need God. This is the driving impetus behind so much of the atheism that is continuing to rise in our culture. More and more of our fellow Americans are describing themselves as being atheists. And the heart of atheism is, I don't need God. You know, the one of the most fundamental arguments atheists use against those who believe in God is, oh, God is just a crutch for you. You need God. You think you can't get by with God, so you invent this person up there who will love you and take care of you. Well, I don't need God. I can work for myself. I can provide for myself. We're smart enough. We have the technology and the science and the understanding. We're now reached a stage where we don't need all this religious mumbo jumbo. I don't need God. That's not a person who's poor in spirit. So I don't need God to find any happiness. I don't need him for meaning, for guidance. I don't need God. And the things that you people who believe in God and embrace Christianity, those things you're looking for, I can find that you find in Jesus. I can find that someplace else. I can find that someplace else. I don't need God. So just as the first statement, I don't need food to live, so also the second statement, I don't need God to live, is as completely foolish. So, what is it? Why are the destitute in spirit blessed? The key is the utter desperation and destitution. Being poor in spirit is not being desperate and destitute, but being desperate and destitute and knowing that you're desperate and destitute, and knowing that only God can help. So if you just interpreted it as, blessed are the destitute in spirit, and you just hear it as that, there's a way that you could say that doesn't make any sense. Because people that are destitute, by definition, are destitute in spirit because they don't have God, right? The people that feel hunger because they don't have food. That's true. But Jesus' point is that when the spirit, the inner person, becomes aware of that circumstance, the truth comes to the forefront of how desperate and destitute they are, then to whom will they turn? You see, now they're going to come to God because they need God. They come to God not because, well, I'm going to do my religious thing and try to be a good person, but you still live your life like you don't need God. I know this sounds disturbing, but Christians sometimes live like they don't need God. They live like they have to perform for God and do things for God or not do things for God, but they don't live like they need God. Okay? They don't live like they're in a destitute, desperate situation that only God can help them with, and that they turn to God and look to him for what he offers, which is his infinite goodness and grace to help us in our time of need. So when you are in the place where you realize that without God, you're nothing, and you're always aware of that, you're always staying, if I can use this word, in tune with God. Your inner being has become acclimated to, I can't live without God. So that makes a lot of sense. I hope that you can see the insight that Jesus is giving us here. When you are in that place of destitution of spirit, you are now in the perfect place to receive what God is giving you. For God so loved the world that he gave. When you're poor in spirit, you're ready to receive what God is giving you. When you're not poor in spirit, you're not in a receptive place because you're filled and you're full and satisfied, and you don't think you need God. So you do the religious duties, you do the religious obligations, but in the end, you don't really need God. Okay? So when Jesus tells the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector in Luke chapter 18, the Pharisee doesn't need God. He doesn't ask God for forgiveness. He brags about what he does and what he doesn't do. The tax collector knows that he needs God. He's broken. He knows he's sinful. And he can't look up to heaven as he prays and says, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Okay? So, let's conclude with these three observations about destitution in spirit. So, once we are destitute in spirit, we enter into the deep realization that, number one, apart from God, no life can be found. That isn't just words that dribble off a preacher's mouth. You have a deep felt, deeply, I keep using realization, this deep felt realization, awakening that apart from God, there is no life to be found. The second part of the destitute in spirit is that they say, I cannot find life apart from God. I've tried it and it doesn't work. This is the second point's key here. Not only are they saying I cannot find life, they're saying I cannot find life apart from God because I've tried to find life apart from God and it doesn't work. And I'm convinced that in many ways Jesus is speaking to, let's call them the spiritually exhausted men and women of his day, the men and women who are drained dry, where it seems that all life does is take and steal and rob, that there is nothing for which life has its ultimate meaning. And now Jesus comes along and says, you know, because you are in that place, as strange as it sounds, you are now in a place to receive what I am proclaiming and offering to you, which is the good news of the kingdom of God. Okay? And the third part of being destitute in spirit is you can now live in utter dependence upon God and trust wholly in his graciousness to meet all of your needs. And so that's the ongoing reality of being poor in spirit, is that because you are able to maintain the realization of how empty and destitute you are without God, it keeps you forever, again, I'm going to use this word, in tune with God, living in utter dependence upon him and knowing that without him you cannot do anything, that you were always designed to be in union with God, and what we're trying to accomplish is what we can only accomplish by being in union with God. And we're only going to be living in union with God when we are destitute and poor in spirit. So I hope these reflections have shed some light on at least some of the things our Lord is seeking to convey to us, that we will recognize that brokenness and helplessness and even desperation and destitution can be transformed and translated into some of the most wonderful occasions for us to be awakened and to see and to know how deep is our need for God, and to see how God and God alone can meet those needs. Thank you for your time and your attention, and we'll see you soon.